Minecraft Java Edition 1.21.6 is the Chase the Skies drop with the Happy Ghasts mount, new leash mechanics, the Locator Bar, and more. My name is Sliced Lime, and this is the most comprehensive guide you'll find to all the changes. Let's get into it. The dried ghast block can be found generated in the nether among nether fossil structures, or it can be crafted using 1 soul sand block and 8 ghast tears. Another way to obtain the dried ghast block is to barter with piglins. They now have a chance to give exactly 1 dried ghast with the same chance as that of obtaining ender pearls. You can mine it by punching without a tool and it breaks instantly. Placing it has no special requirements, it can be placed unsupported. It can be waterlogged, which changes its frowny face, and it then undergoes a transformation through 3 states over 20 minutes. These different states have different sounds and particles. Dried ghast blocks emit vibrations with a frequency of 11 when they change states. Aborting the transformation by mining the block will revert it back to its original dry and unhappy state regardless of where it was in the process, and removing the water will make it start drying out at the same speed as it was hydrating. The dried ghast does not conduct redstone but can be moved by pistons and is dark grey on a map. Once the full 20-minute transformation has happened, the block disappears and a Ghastling mob spawns. This is the baby version of the Happy Ghasts mob. It flies around like a bee and will try to follow players that get within 16 blocks, or an adult non-aquatic passive mob, and some neutral mobs within that radius. If there's no suitable target to follow within 16 blocks, the Ghastling will idle around an area of 32 blocks from its home position, which is set where it spawned, and then moves if the mob is interacted with. If the Ghastling is moved more than 48 blocks from its home position, it will also update its home position to where it was moved to. Like other baby mobs, Ghastlings grow over the course of 20 minutes, which is shortened if they are fed. The food of preference for Happy Ghasts is a snowball, and they can also be tempted by holding snowballs. Once grown up, they become almost as large as the regular ghasts. Adult Happy Ghasts also love snowballs and are tempted by them, but cannot be fed to breed. The Happy Ghast is a new mount for up to 4 players, which requires a harness item. This is a new item which can only be equipped on Happy Ghasts, crafted out of 3 leather, 2 glass blocks and 1 wool block. It is a dyed item which will start out the same color as the wool block used to craft it, but can also be re-dyed by crafting it with a dye. If you have a harness item and the ghast isn't already wearing one, you can also use the harness to tempt it. You can also use a dispenser to equip a harness on a Happy Ghast. The Happy Ghast is controlled by the first player who mounts it, who will be seated at the front of the mob just above the face. The goggles on the harness moves down in front of the eyes whenever the ghast is controlled. The controls for flying the ghast are a bit different than other mounts. Pressing the forward and backward buttons will move the ghast in the direction you are looking, or back away from it. Pressing left and right will strafe 90 degrees from that direction. Pressing the jump button moves the ghast straight upwards. To fly downwards, look down and press forward. When flying the Happy Ghast, the third-person camera is positioned further away from the player than normally. Flying it into water forces all players to automatically dismount. Players who mount after the pilot are placed in the side slots, starting clockwise from the pilot. If the pilot dismounts, the next player is moved into the pilot seat just like for other multi-slot vehicles. Pressing the crouch button makes you dismount just like in other vehicles. The dismount position is different though. Dismounting a Happy Ghast places you on top of the ghast where you can walk around. This also applies to Happy Ghasts without a harness if you jump onto it. An uncontrolled Happy Ghast with players on top of it will try to remain stationary and align with one of the cardinal directions, making its hitbox and its visuals align. Once there are no players riding, the harness will flip up. Once no one is on top, the ghast will idle by roaming randomly within 32 blocks of its home position, similar to the Ghastling. If the Happy Ghast is not wearing a harness, this distance is instead 64 blocks. If there are players riding who dismounted in mid-air, the ghast will first descend towards the ground before roaming. When roaming, the Happy Ghast will attempt to stay close to blocks. The harness can be removed using shears, which only works when there are no players mounted on the ghast. Happy Ghasts have 20 hit points, that is 10 hearts. They have no panic behavior when they take damage. They cannot be fed to heal them, but instead regenerate slowly. 1 hit point every 30 seconds by default, or 1 hit point every second if the ghast is flying through rain or snowfall, or flying at cloud level in the overworld. Unlike their grumpy nether counterparts, Happy Ghasts are not resistant to lava. Happy Ghasts cannot enter boats, but can enter minecarts. You wouldn't kill a Happy Ghast, would you? But if you did, they drop nothing except XP. You monster. Of course, this new mob also comes with a new spawn egg. In related news, the texture of the regular old grumpy ghasts have also been updated. There are also 2 new advancements in this version. Stay hydrated, for placing a dried ghast into water, and Heart Transplanter, for placing a creaking heart in alignment with 2 pale oak logs. This version brings us a complete overhaul of leads. Crafting a lead is now done without slime balls. Instead of the slime ball, there is now 1 additional string in that spot of the recipe. Leads can now be used to leash 2 mobs together. Sneaking while holding 1 or more leashed mobs and interacting with another mob will leash all the leashed mobs to the interacted entity instead. This only works when the leash has enough range and you cannot leash an entity to itself. When leashing an already leashed entity, the current leash will transfer to being held by the player instead, although you cannot steal the leash from another player this way. You can also now clip the leashes off of entities by interacting while holding shears, which also works if you place the shears in a dispenser. Interacting with a leash knot on a fence or with the fence itself has also changed. If you are holding a leashed entity that can be leashed to the fence, the leash will transfer over to the fence. If that is not possible for any reason, all the mobs leashed to the fence currently will instead be releashed to be held by the player. Sneaking while doing this means you can only leash things to the fence, not pick up the leashes that are already there. If you interact with a fence knot using shears, or if you punch it, all the leashed mobs will be set free. And if nothing is left leashed to the leash knot, it will disappear. There are changes to how leashes work beyond interactions too. They now render twice as thick, matching how they already looked on Bedrock Edition. Leashes now snap when the holder and the leashed entity are 12 blocks apart, which is up from 10 blocks before. And this distance is now calculated between the center of bounding boxes rather than between feet positions. And when you drag on a leash, the held mob will orient itself towards the leasher more quickly. Leash physics have been reworked, allowing for more stable leash connections, especially when the leashed entity is not on the ground. However, flying with Elytra and holding leashed mobs now break those connections immediately if you use a firework rocket. The Happy Ghast also has some special leash functionality. It can have large mobs that can be leashed but cannot fit in a boat, and the boats themselves leashed in a special 4-leash configuration. When this happens, the leashes are rendered without slack and the ghast shows a custom layer. Leashing a Happy Ghast in particular also allows for a longer lead before it snaps, up to 16 blocks away. The Locator Bar is a new user interface element to make finding other players easier. This element replaces the experience bar above the hotbar when on a multiplayer server together with at least 1 more player. But unlike the XP bar, it is also visible when in creative and spectator modes. The experience bar pops up whenever you pick up XP and when in the enchanting or anvil screens. This is also controlled with a new game rule called Locator Bar, which can enable or disable the feature dynamically. By default, all players show a waypoint for all other players, which allows you to locate others in multiplayer. The Locator Bar shows a colored indicator when the camera is facing within 120 degrees of a waypoint and shows an up or down arrow if the target is outside the screen vertically. There is no maximum distance to how far away players show up on the Locator Bar, but the waypoint icon switches between 4 different styles depending on the distance. The closest icon indicates up to 128 blocks away, the second one if the player is closer than 230 blocks away, the third one at 332 blocks, and the last one anything above 332 blocks. If the player is on a team, their color will match that of the team, and is otherwise a random but consistent color for each player. That is to say, the color for the same player is always the same. Crouching hides you from the locator bar, as does wearing any skull or head item or a carved pumpkin, or using a potion of invisibility. Spectators are only visible to other spectators, just like in World. In gameplay news, a controversial bug fix that happened late in the snapshot cycle for the previous release has been reverted. That fix changed the entity interaction for nether portals to only happen when the entity touched the actual collision box of the portal block, rather than simply being in the block space of the portal. That broke a number of contraptions and has now been reverted. This change comes with a developer's note stating that this might still change at some point in the future when the resulting issues can be dealt with. Examples of things that were broken by that fix include minecarts traveling through portals, entities interacting with portals differently, and the portal collisions now depending on the cardinal direction of the portal. Spectators that are spectating an entity will now be teleported with that entity if it moves to another dimension. They will, however, still stop spectating that entity. TNT touching water will now destroy item entities and armor stands once again. This had changed in Minecraft 1.21.5, but is now back to the way it used to be. The player who lit a TNT is now credited with the kill, even if the world has been reloaded. When flying with Elytra, using a firework rocket now always uses it as a boost, even if you are currently pointed at a block. Projectiles now have a tolerance margin that changes over time, starting at none for the first 2 ticks of flight, and then increasing with 0.05 blocks per tick until it reaches the previous value of 0.3 blocks. This allows for better precision close to the entity firing the projectile, but still allows for some collision leeway when the projectile is further away. Ender pearls no longer sometimes unexpectedly stop in flight when they get sent into unloaded chunks. Saddles can now be crafted, which is done using an iron ingot surrounded by 3 pieces of leather. This comes together with a change that replaces saddles in all loot chests with 1 to 5 pieces of leather. In related news, you can now remove saddles, horse armor, harnesses, and carpets from mobs wearing them using shears. This only works if there is no one riding the mob and if you are not crouching, and it has to be a player holding the shears rather than a dispenser. You can never remove the saddle from a Ravager. Horses, donkeys, and mules can now also be fed carrots to heal, grow, and improve their temper. This is in addition to the items you could already feed them. Tamed animals now sit down once again if the owner is in another dimension. Splash potions have been changed, so their effect strength is now based on distance to the hitbox of a target, rather than to that entity's foot position. And a splash potion that hits an entity directly will inflict the maximum possible effect. The Firefly bushes have been updated to generate as many particles as they do on Bedrock Edition, and leaf litter no longer generates inside of Woodland Mansions. A rune called B5 in Woodland Mansions never generated before, but now can. Let's move on to some visual news. Clouds now render all the way to the horizon, regardless of what your render distance is set to. This is controlled by a new option to set the cloud rendering distance between the default of 128 chunks down to 2 chunks. The pattern of the clouds in the sky has also been updated, which now includes an elusive creeper face in the clouds. The fog of the game has been tweaked for improved atmospheric perspective. It now also becomes foggier when it rains, even in biomes that don't actually have rain. This fog only shows when outside and fades the further away from skylight you get. Visual effects like fog, rain, and so on now affect your hand and held items in the first-person view, and the fog now affects the block-breaking overlay and the translucent blocks being moved by pistons. Filled maps are no longer blurry, and clocks and compasses now render enchantment glints properly when using the fabulous graphics mode. And some item models that would previously clip into the ground when in item form no longer do. In sound news, ambient sounds for desert blocks have changed in this version. Ambient sand sounds no longer require the blocks to have sky access to play, and now overall have a slightly decreased chance to play. Terracotta blocks no longer trigger sand sounds. Sand and terracotta blocks no longer trigger wind sounds in desert and badlands biomes. Instead, these sounds are now triggered in any biome when a short or tall dried grass block is placed above 2 blocks of any sand or terracotta type. Dead bush ambient sounds now have a slightly increased chance of playing. The volume level of dirt-related sounds has been adapted to the new volume level of grass sounds. There is a new volume slider for UI sounds in this version. Just like music, UI sounds continue playing when the game is paused. 2 sound categories have been renamed. Friendly creatures and hostile creatures are now friendly mobs and hostile mobs. Subtitles now show even if your master volume is set to 0. There are 5 new songs in the game in this version by a new composer called Amos Roddy. They are Below and Above, which plays in cherry groves. Broken Clocks, which plays in forests. Fireflies plays in deserts. Lilypad plays in frozen peaks and groves. And O's Piano, which plays in lush caves. All the tracks can also play in biomes that don't have a specific set of songs, and some of the recently added tracks in the main menu have been replaced with these new ones. This new music comes with a new functionality for music. Music now keeps playing even when the game is paused, and there are 2 new settings for music. One setting is for how often music plays, between default, frequent, and constant. The other new option is for showing the currently playing song. This shows as a toast when a new song starts playing, and that toast is also always visible in the pause menu. But that's not all the music-related news. There's also a new music disc in the game, Tears by Amos Roddy. To obtain this disc, you'll need to kill a ghast with a reflected fireball. There's some user interface news in this version as well. The main menu panorama has been updated and now shows a scene with Happy Ghasts flying next to a mountainside. The game's credits have been updated, and some splash texts have been updated. New splash texts of Music By have been added for the composers who didn't already have them. And there are added splash texts for Flint and Steel and Chicken Jockey. Clicking on the statistics button no longer advances the game by 1 tick, and the sound of that click now plays immediately rather than after you continue playing. There's also a new keybind in this version called Quick Actions. The default key for it is G, and it brings up a screen to select actions that are available on custom servers or provided by custom data packs. And this version adds 2 new languages, Cantabrian and Old Indonesian. The Realm configuration screen has been updated and is now a tabbed screen, much like the Create World screen with Worlds, Players, Subscription, and the Settings tabs. The Settings tab also has a new setting for realms in this version called Region Preference that allows for more control of where a realm server runs. The default is for the realm to automatically run as close as possible to the owner to minimize ping, but this can be changed to run as close as possible to the first player to join each session instead, or set to a specific location. The Realms loading screen has been updated and now shows the Realms logo together with the information about which region the server you are connecting to is in. This version also comes with Data Pack version 80 and Resource Pack version 63, with changes like a brand new system for custom UI dialogues. If you're also interested in that, keep your eyes on this channel for a separate video. But that's all for this one. Thank you for watching. As a YouTuber, it is my duty to chase the like drops. So please click all the things below the video to keep this channel rising like a balloon in the algorithm skies. My name is Slice Slime, and I'll see you next time.